After a 3-game losing streak, the Royals have responded with a 3-game winning streak. What do we make of the last couple of games? We'll talk about it next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I am your host, Jack Johnson, and you can follow me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and want to know a little bit more about myself, I'm based in Kansas City. I work over at Sports Radio 810 WHB. Got a show once a week, usually as a host on 810, usually during time hours, but I do some co-hosting on The Zone and also do some producing as well. So I stay pretty busy in the sports world. But when you come to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you are getting 30 straight minutes of Kansas City Royals baseball. Now, today's show, which comes to you after a long rain delay that officially was called about 15 minutes ago from when I actually started doing this podcast. It's been a wild afternoon, but glad I can still give you this episode. And this episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go, one of the more fun mobile games out there. I checked the leaderboards, and over 150 million people are doing so as well. So go get started and download Monopoly Go. It's on the App Store and the Google Play Store. So plenty of ways to find it. Very easy to do so and very fun if you are a Monopoly fan like myself. Well, as I just mentioned, the Royals had a very weird afternoon. Going into this game, it did not appear like the weather was going to hold up for an extended period of time. They had about an hour and a half to get as much of this game in as they could. And I thought, at least on a getaway day, there was no need. If there was a delay, cancel the game. It didn't matter if the Royals are winning or Toronto was winning. The Royals play tomorrow at noon in Detroit. Okay, so there was not a desperate need to get this game in on April 25th, right? And we've seen this, at least over the last, probably 20, 25 years. When it's a getaway day, if there's even a thought that the game was not going to be able to be played, I mean, we go back to that White Sox series when they were on the road, the last road trip, in fact. That game that was looking iffy before the getaway day was just canceled. It was just, we're not going to do this. Now, they had a chance to do that doubleheader the next day and got it in plenty of time before the Royals had to head back home. But still, you see in baseball over the course of a long season that sometimes when it's an official game, you just got to make the right call, right? You don't need to, force the issue. And I would probably say the same thing if the Royals were losing at the time of playing Toronto. When you get past 2 hours, at that point, you just go, all right, we got to get on the road here. We got to, head off Detroit. There is no need to try to force the issue here. Use some of our bullpen, risk injury. At that point, that's what I had gotten to. And it does feel good now that the Royals are on a 3-game winning streak. And I promise we're going to sum it all up here in about 5 minutes. But to me, my worry at that point became injury. In fact, I was a little bit concerned about injury for Cole Reagans when he was throwing in that monsoon. I mean, he's constantly drying his hands. He's trying to pick the mud, the dirt off of his cleats. He wasn't finding good footing. He didn't have a good grip on the ball. And I'm going, what are we doing here? Like, after you got it through an official game, and John Schneider comes out for Toronto after the 5th inning. The Royals didn't get any runs. And he basically says, no, don't put the tarp on the field. We're going to try to get this played. The Royals grounds crew uses a ton of diamond dry. We're doing everything they can to keep the field dried up, to soak up all the standing water that was in the infield. And then they still pull the tarp on the field. So at that point, you've already had gallons and gallons of water dumping on the field. And then you have this 3-hour and 30-minute rain delay. You take the tarp off the field. You are working on the field. And then you go, no, it's not playable. Well, that decision has to be made much earlier on a getaway day. That's where I'm at. And believe me, I understand Toronto's frustration because they felt like when the game was postponed, or when the game was delayed, they were down 1. No, they don't want to concede. Just say, oh, never mind, we're not going to win this game. They very well could have won that game if it was resumed. But the way I see it, and the way maybe the approach I would have taken is it's April 25th. What happens if you come back and win that game, but you lose one of your players because the field conditions aren't great? I mean, it was dumping at Kauffman Stadium. And it was an official game. I would understand the argument if this was not an official game. But both teams had 5 innings to do something. And the Royals were leading 2-1 at the end of this. Toronto has a night game tomorrow, so they're flying back home. It's a long flight for them. The Royals do have a somewhat shorter flight, but they play here in 18 hours. So they're getting in tonight. They probably busted it over to the airport, got on the plane, and now they're already on their way. But they could have been landed in Detroit by now. You know, they could have been there already, had a chance to go back to the hotel, do whatever, watch the NFL draft, of course, relax, and then get up early to start a 3-game series in Detroit. But fortunately, the Royals were definitely a beneficiary of a short game being called. They had to wait a little bit longer, but a win is a win. They've now won 3 in a row. The pitching in these last 3 games has been, I think, just as good as advertised. Michael Walker didn't work deep into the game. He didn't pitch that well, but 2 runs over 4 1/3. Alec Marsh, same thing, but he left with a elbow contusion. And hopefully he only misses a start or 2. And then Cole Reagans, in just awful, crappy conditions, gets through 5 innings, a 1-run ball. And it was good enough for the Royals to grab the 4th and final game of the series. They won the final 3 and now are on a 3-game winning streak. And it's hard not to be impressed through these first 26 games. They've also clinched a winning month. They have won another series against the team over 500. I believe that's the first series they have won against the team over 500. There was those rumblings about could they beat anybody else besides the White Sox? Well, they lost game 1 in a 4-game set and found a way to win the remaining 3. Even though this 4th game was shortened, it was canned. They faced Jose Barrios today, who hadn't given up a run since April 2nd, and immediately got 2 runs in the first on Salvador Perez, his 2-run shot. He's been not just all-star level. He's playing at an MVP level right now at the age of 34, or he's going to be turning 34 here shortly. We're going to talk about him in the final segment. But talk about a bounce back. I don't think you would have even thought this was possible last year. When you lose game 1 of a 4-game set, you're just praying to grab 2 in that series. You're lucky to grab 1. And it's likely you're probably getting swept by a good team, and Toronto is a good team and had a good starting rotation. They saw some of the better arms that the Blue Jays have, and they're going to see a couple more of them when they face Toronto starting next Monday on the road. Then they'll be done with the Blue Jays for the rest of the regular season. So 2 AL East teams that they saw this past weekend, and the parts of this week, they'll be done with them in April after tomorrow or after next week. I'm getting all my words mixed up here. Again, I don't know where my brain is at. I've been thinking about what I was going to say in this podcast episode during a 3-hour and 30-minute rain delay, but I'll find my way here through the next 22 minutes or so. The offense is still a little bit in its rut, but now you are just seeing the bullpen come into shape. The rotation, even though they've had a slight regression, it's good enough to win baseball games. And you're seeing Maikel Garcia get hotter again. You're seeing Bobby Witt Jr. get hotter again. Vinny Pasquantino, Salvador Perez still doing the same things. MJ Melendez, Nelson Velasquez not really providing you much, but you're 16-10. And you've won 16 games in the month of April. It's hard not to be impressed by what you've seen. I mean, these are things that, don't just happen easily. Winning months in baseball are really, really difficult. And this was a month that this team was going to be challenged with, right? The first 35 games of the season, it was going to be a big test for them. This was going to be a first month that for a lot of people would define who they were. And we've talked about that 40-game sample size. Once you get to 40 games, it doesn't tell you who your team is, but it tells you who your players are going to likely be. And now we're inching closer and closer to that. And I don't believe this team is going to have some fall off where you look up and they're 15, 20 games below 500. I think if anything, this month has shown us they've got pieces here to remain competitive all season long. And it's not to get caught up in one series. In the same way I didn't want to get caught up in what they were doing to the White Sox, what they were doing to the Astros, who now look like they are barreling toward disaster. But you look at this division, of course, Cleveland is playing well. Detroit, who you see this weekend, is playing well. You found a way to hang in there. You're in second place in your own division. And even though it's early, you think about it. If they weren't playing good baseball, if they had started through these first 26 games and they were, let's say, 10-16, let's just flip the record here. 10-16, they wouldn't be buried, but it wouldn't look very good. It would be a bit concerning, in my opinion. And right now, you feel like they can hang in there. And that's all I think Royals fans are asking for this year is hang around, hang in there, give yourself a fighter's chance to win this division. And through the first month of the season, they've clinched a winning month. Those are positives you can take away and lead you into the summer. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, a fun series lined up this weekend against a team that I believe is very equivalent to the Kansas City Royals. That's coming up on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can follow me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Before we go any further, I want to give a shout out to a couple of the sponsors today, and we're going to start it off with Policygenius. Policygenius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace, and it saves you time and money so you can provide your family with financial safety starting today. With Policygenius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options offer same-day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. Check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policygenius. Head to policygenius.com/lockedonmlb or click the link in the description to give you your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/lockedonmlb. The other sponsor we want to give a shout out to is the title sponsor today. And you guessed it, it was Monopoly Go, one of the more fun mobile games out there that you can go and download on the App Store or the Google Play Store. Now, with Monopoly Go, we've all been there, either as a player or a fan. It's halftime, and the scoreboard is not looking good. You're feeling low, not sure you or your team can pull out the win. That's when you dig deep, lift your head up, and say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much of my friend's money as I possibly can. That's right. The smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much to do. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put your game face on, and download Monopoly Go. It's now free on the App Store or Google Play. Well, even though it's a little bit more delayed, the Royals are headed off to Detroit. It's where the NFL draft is, but they aren't going there to enjoy the draft. I know Vinny Pasquantino said that he wanted to be out there maybe tonight, but that's not looking likely at this point unless the plane and the jet gets there on record time. But this team is going to be heading off Detroit to face the Tigers for the first time this season, and it's going to be a really fun series. This is one team, I think, in the AL Central I am most looking forward to playing. More so than Minnesota, more so than Cleveland, of course, more so than Chicago. This team is, I think, going to be the mark of the AL Central, just how good this division can be. I think we understand Minnesota is struggling, but when they get healthy, they can be a good team. They can be a top team in this division. Then you look at Cleveland. Cleveland's had the success, and even on teams that they don't have the most talent, they've got younger guys. It always feels like they're going to be in the hunt some way, shape, or form. And then right now you've got the Royals and the Tigers. Are the Royals and Tigers legit? Are they contenders or are they pretenders? I think a lot of people are asking themselves this question. And they are built kind of similar. The Tigers have their ace, the guy that is underrated maybe in the national eye, but has certainly been talked about more over the last year because of a really strong second half. It's Tarek Skubal, who the Royals will see on Sunday. The Royals have Cole Reagans, guy with a really strong second half, and then got national love going into this season. The Royals have their cornerstone piece and Bobby Witt Jr., the guy they've given the long-term deal to, their superstar. There are options for Detroit. None are close to Bobby Witt Jr., but I'd say Riley Green, who is one of MLB's dark horses to win the MVP, he can be seen as that guy. Then they've got a big-time power-hitting first baseman, Spencer Torkelson, a former 1-1 pick, and Vinny Pasquantino for the Royals. The bullpen, much better in Detroit than it is in Kansas City. And the Royals bullpen isn't bad, but that's the strength of the Tigers. That's what made the Tigers offense last year kind of be covered up with how bad it was because the bullpen was so good. And the Tigers rotation has a lot of homegrown talent in there now. You'll see Casey Mize on Saturday. Talked about Tarek Skubal. He'll be pitching on Sunday. You had Matt Manning in there. You got young guys like Reese Olson. It is a Tigers team that I think could really provide the Royals a good rivalry over the next handful of years. I think these are two teams that are ascending at the exact same time. Now, Detroit is one of those teams, you don't look at their lineup and you go, that is a scary lineup, like Baltimore. All right, even Toronto, that top half of the lineup, it's not fun going through George Springer, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., and Bo Bichette, and then Dalton Varsho's a little bit lower on that list. It's not a fun lineup. And the Tigers have guys that can run into some. And Spencer Torkelson had 30 home runs last year. Riley Green, he's always been a tough out for the Royals. You've got guys that are maybe not as well known. Kelly Carpenter's one of them. You have really a group of players that I want to say are similar to the Royals, where if the Royals are playing somebody in the National League, you don't really know all their names, but they can be tough hitters to get out. Now, there's also guys that are really struggling. Javi Baez, one of them for the Tigers, overpaid, swings at just about everything, but well-known around the league. I would say Javi Baez is not Salvador Perez because Perez, of course, having a much better year. But in terms of status, a lot of people know Salvador Perez. A lot of people know Javi Baez. And this Detroit team is one that when you see the lineup tomorrow, you're not going to recognize a lot of the names, but they're a good baseball team. Even some of the bullpen guys, you're not going to recognize a lot of the names, but they are really tough to face. Jason Foley coming out of the bullpen, the back end for Detroit, he's going to be as unhittable as any bullpen guy the Royals have seen this year. And if you are trailing late in the game against Detroit, it's probably likely you are not going to win that game. They've done a fantastic job assembling that bullpen, a fantastic job assembling that rotation. I think A.J. Hinch was the right hire for Detroit at the time. He was coming off that scandal, but still had tons of success as a manager. And if he was given a second chance, Detroit said, why not it be us? Why can't you do the same thing you did in Houston and do it with our guys? And I think this series will be a really good indicator about, just in the month of April, which direction these teams are heading in. I would be floored if one of these teams swept the series. It's only a 3-game set, so somebody's going to walk away a winner. Of course, you hope it's going to be the Royals, but it's going to be a lot of fun. I love the idea of this series, and I love the idea of this rivalry moving forward. There's not a lot of hate on either side, but you can recall back in 2013, 14, 15, and not really 16, because at that point, in fact, I'd probably say not even 15. More so 13 and 14, the team that the Royals were always chasing was Detroit. In 2014, the Royals were chasing Detroit all season long, and you had to get through Detroit if you were going to win the Central. And in the end, the Royals couldn't win the Central in 2014, but after 2014, the Tigers sold off all their pieces, and they were not very good in 2015. But that's what I would love to see in the Central. I don't think the Royals will ever have that rivalry with Cleveland. I don't think they're ever going to have that rivalry with Chicago. I don't think they're ever going to have that rivalry with the Twins. And I say rivalry with Chicago, I think there's something there, but it's not like good baseball. They're not really good at the same time. Detroit and Kansas City always seem to find a way in the last 15 years that when they're good, they're both good. When they're bad, they're both bad. And this kind of feels like that upstart, that this could be the beginning of something of fun baseball in the Central, that when you are looking at an upcoming series in June, July, or August, and it's the Royals and the Tigers, it's going to mean something. I don't look at these teams and say one is much better than the other. I think they are very equivalent, passionate fan bases, and two fan bases that are enjoying damn good April baseball right now. So I am pumped for this series. You get a noon game on a Friday, so Maybe you can leave work a little bit early and catch out this game. It'll be Seth Lugo versus Reese Olson in this game. In game 2, it is going to be Casey Mize versus Brady Singer, a pair of 2018 first-rounders. And then it will be Michael Wacha and Tarek Skubal, one of the leaders for the American League Cy Young Award on Detroit side. Michael Wacha looking to pitch much better than he did in game 2 against the Toronto Blue Jays a couple of days back. Okay, we're going to move on to our final segment of the show. Before we do that, we want to give a shout out to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For our final segment, let's dive into Salvador Perez and this start that he's had. Is it sustainable? And do we feel like he's going to make yet another All-Star game and maybe strengthen his case to get into the Hall of Fame? That's coming up on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can always follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, want to give a shout out to the final sponsor today and our third sponsor of the show in PrizePicks. Spring training is over and baseball season is officially underway. Don't miss your chance to add your favorite players from the diamond in your PrizePicks entries. Whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, or first inning runs, take your pick of more or less and add them to your PrizePicks entries. You can also get in on the playoff action and win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during basketball's postseason. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDONMLB, for a first deposit match of up to $100. Well, Salvador Perez had the only 2 runs in this game for Kansas City, a 2-run shot off of Jose Barrios in the first inning of this game, and he's just never slowed down. There were first 2 games of the series against Minnesota back in March was when Salvador Perez was being doubted. I vividly remember it. We had a mailbag Friday. There were a handful of people. I'm not going to call them out. I'm not going to be, somebody that says, I told you so. But a lot of people were saying, what do you do with Salvador Perez? His approach is so poor. He swings at everything. You go with Freddie Fermin moving forward. And now we have to basically come to terms with the fact that Salvador Perez can't be an everyday player anymore. And I just said you can't make judgments about that 2 games in. And also, this is who Salvador Perez has always been. He has always been a bad ball hitter. He's also been a damn good hitter his entire career. When he's healthy, when he's 100%, it can look like this in stretches. And he is the most consistent and best hitter in the lineup right now. At this point in time, 16-10 with the Royals heading to Detroit, he is the guy that is the toughest out. His OPS is well over 1,000 at this point. He's hitting north of 350. He's got 25 RBIs this month. That leads the league. He's got 7 home runs. He is pacing for an absurd amount. I mean, John Morosi said on Twitter, he said he is barreling toward his next All-Star game, and he believes he's the Hall of Famer. And that, I think, has been the long-term debate of, is he a Hall of Famer? Can Salvy get in? And it was always, well, he's not healthy enough or his defense isn't very good. Now the advanced metrics support Salvador Perez defensively. Early on, when analytics weren't a big thing, Salvy was winning Gold Glove after Gold Glove, and then the advanced metrics were showing he actually wasn't that good behind the plate. And then he made this insane adjustment this offseason, and now he's stealing strikes. He's a better framer. He's always been able to throw guys out behind the dish, and he's still doing that at a high level. And we are so soon to forget he's nearing his mid-30s. In fact, he's in his mid-30s. He's going to be 34 here, I believe, in a couple of weeks, if I'm not mistaken. 34 years old and doing this as a catcher. You look at the catcher's position in baseball now. It is not an offensive-heavy position. You have some great talented guys, Will Smith being one of them. We fell in love with Gabby Moreno in the postseason. Jonah Heim is a great catcher. He's also great behind the plate defensively. You look at JT Real Muto. I know I'm leaving guys out here, but there are talented guys. But it's not an offensive-heavy position. It's always been known as a defense-first position, at least once analytics became a big part of stealing strikes and framing and pitch framing, all of that. And Salvador Perez was really just known as this big offensive catcher that could hit 50 home runs, but also wasn't very durable over the last couple of years. But this, to me, is why I am changing my opinion on him maybe becoming a Hall of Famer. Right? Yadier Molina, I think here, if you were in Kansas City and you grew up a Royals fan your entire life, you obviously don't like the Cardinals, or if maybe you do have a family member that is a Cardinals fan, and so you kind of have a split household, whatever the case may be. But Yadier Molina has always been that mark. Well, Yadi could get in because Yadi had all these gold gloves. He was great defensively. He was still a good hitter, 10-time All-Star. And it was like, well, Salvy's not Yadi behind the plate. But we also saw at the very end of Yadi's career, him basically become a non-factor offensively. Now, the Cardinals were still winning, and that didn't tarnish Yadi's reputation at all. Yadi's still one of the greatest to ever do it. I just am starting to look at Salvador Perez and going, I would have expected the fall off by now. The durability becomes a problem. You know, when you're always dealing with injuries, how good of a hitter can you really be? He looks as good as he ever has, and he's 34, and he's a big catcher. That we also don't talk about enough. Salvador Perez is a large human being, and he is behind the plate a lot for a 34-year-old. Now, he'll get off his feet. He'll play first base like he did today. He'll be DHing from time to time. But Salvador Perez spends a lot of time behind home plate. And when you're squatting back there, it's hard on the knees. And when you are 6'4", 6'3", 6'4", 240, that's a big dude. That's a big catcher. And when you can still hit like, I just continue to be marvel at what he does. I think he is absolutely, he doesn't even have to keep up this pace. If he regresses 10, 20%, he's still going to the All-Star game. And when he keeps racking those up, and if he runs into 35, 40 home runs this year, what is the argument going to be that he can't get into the Hall of Fame? I mean, if he does this half of what he's doing, 75% of what he's doing next year, the year after that, I think he's in. And that would be just an awesome thing to see because I don't believe he's going to play anywhere else. Remember, we had some podcast episodes last year about kind of nearing the deadline. Are the Royals going to trade Salvador Perez? He was willing to lift his trade clause, no trade clause. And when it came down to it, he said, if it makes it better for the team, then I will waive it. But he always wanted to stay here. And now after this year, at least this start, I don't envision him going anywhere. I think he's going to spend his entire career here. He is not going to play baseball for another team. It is always going to be the Royals. And he is just becoming so decorated. And I cross my fingers he doesn't have another injury. Some of them have been freakish, like slipping on steps and tearing your ACL, having Tommy John as a catcher, the blurriness in his eye, collision at home plate, he strains his groin, he's only out a day. I mean, think about that. As a big catcher and you're almost 34, you miss one game with a groin strain. I mean, he is unbelievable. He is an unbelievable talent, and you just have to appreciate what he's doing at this level. And he looks as good as he ever has in a Royals uniform. And he is almost 15 years into his career. Not a lot of guys get better with age, and especially not behind the plate. Salvador Perez is one of those guys that is just defying all of the odds and all of the logic of what you may think about him behind the plate. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. You can always follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15, and you can catch us on wherever you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just to be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. Before we say goodbye, one last shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV Channels app. Well, tomorrow we're going to have another Mailbag Friday. I'll answer all of your questions as we gear up for a 3-game set against the Detroit Tigers. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.